Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israeli and Bahraini leaders share their first official public phone call after the signing of the historic Abraham Accords. Overnight coronavirus infections set another record again as the total number of cases in Israel tops 200,000. And Israeli wineries from Judea and Samaria are earning top marks at this year's prestigious Decanter Awards. Stay tuned to find out which bottles of vino you do not want to miss out on. Starting with some good news today, Israeli-Arab Gulf relations are only moving forwards. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday was speaking with Bahrain's Crown Prince in the first official phone call since the signing of the historic Abraham Accords. It's the first public conversation since signing the landmark Declaration of Peace on the White House lawn. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Bahraini Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa underscoring the importance of securing regional and international peace and stability.
שוחחתי עם יורש העצר של בחריין, הנסיך סלמן בן חמד, שיחה יוצאת מן הכלל, מאוד ידידותית, וחזרנו על העקרונות של הסכמי אברהם, ודיברנו איך אנחנו בעצם יוצקים תוכן מהיר להסכמים בין בחריין וישראל, הופכים את השלום הזה, שלום כלכלי, שלום טכנולוגי, שלום תיירותי, שלום בכל אחד ואחד מהתחומים הללו, ואתם תשמעו על הצעדים המעשיים בקרוב מאוד.
Now, with respect to Israel's other partner in the Abraham Accords, Israel Defense Minister and alternate Prime Minister Benny Gantz is in Arlington, Virginia, welcomed to the Pentagon by United States Secretary of Defense Mark Esper. The pair scheduled to discuss bilateral ties, as well as Israel's continued military superiority in the region. Secretary Esper insisting that Israel will always maintain that edge as a matter of United States policy.
I know we have a lot to cover today, but I do want to say up front for everyone that a cornerstone of our defense relationship is preserving Israel's qualitative military edge in the region. The United States is committed to that, and the Department of Defense is committed to that imperative. And we will continue to support the long-standing U.S. priority to maintain Israel's QME.
The Middle East is an unstable region. I think the only stable place within it is the State of Israel, or one of the most stable places in the Middle East. And as I always say, we have no other United States, nor do you have any other Israel.
Israeli concerns of losing the military edge coming on the heels of growing reports that the United States will sell advanced F-35 warplanes to the United Arab Emirates as a side deal to the Abraham Accords peace agreement. President Trump even recently again indicated that he'd have no problem selling the jets to the Gulf state. Israel has long opposed the sale of F-35s to any U.S. ally in the region, however, including Jordan and Egypt, who also officially recognize Israel. Meanwhile, the Palestinians are taking their protests against the Israel-Arab normalization deals to a new level, cutting off their noses to spite their faces, as the saying goes. Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki now announcing that the Palestinian Authority will renounce its current chairmanship of Arab League meetings.
قررت دولة فلسطين التنازل والتخلي عن حقها في ترأس مجلس الجامعة في دورته الحالية. لأنه لا يشرفها أن تشاهد هرولة العرب نحو التطبيع خلال رئاستها. وكون قرار الهرولة قد اتخذ في واشنطن فليس من المجدي بذل المزيد من الجهد في إقناع أحد بعدم التطبيع خاصة وأنهم ليسوا أصحاب قرار.
Since the announcement of intentions to normalize earlier this summer, the Palestinian Authority has condemned both the United Arab Emirates and now Bahrain for establishing ties with Jerusalem, calling the decision a betrayal of the Palestinian cause and a blow to the two-state solution. Supporters of the Abraham Accords arguing the opposite, though, that negotiations with the Palestinian Authority have been functionally stalled for decades, and that going through other Arab intermediaries first may jumpstart talks. But now joining us with more on the Palestinian Authority's recent decision to renounce its leadership role at the Arab League is former Israeli ambassador and Director General of the Israeli Foreign Ministry, Dr. Alon Liel of the Program for Conflict Resolution at Tel Aviv University. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now, first of all, what do you make of the Palestinians' recent move in canceling its chairmanship?
Look, what happened between Israel and the Emirates and Israel and Bahrain is definitely a setback to Palestinian diplomacy. They feel betrayed and very frustrated, lost, I would say. And they're protesting in any possible way, but nobody is really taking them seriously because they are in a momentum of always not accepting what's going on around, and they made themselves irrelevant. With all the sympathy I personally have toward them and their causes for a two-state solution and a Palestinian state, they must do something about their negative approach and their passive diplomacy and pull themselves together.
Well, so that brings me to my other question. Might this protest actually yield any positive results for the Palestinian Authority? Where do the other Arab League nations sit on the topic of Israeli Gulf relations?
Look, the setback to the Palestinians is that they had the Arab League usually automatically endorsing and embracing their attitudes, and this has been changed. They lost by losing the Gulf countries. They lost now also the support of many other countries and the support of the Arab League, and this is the reason they're so frustrated. I think with all my diplomatic experience, I was very surprised to see that the Emirates, a country that was never involved in regional diplomacy or in the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, made the difference this time. And by changing their policy, they changed the policy of most of the Arab world. And this is the reason it is so effective toward the Palestinians. And this is the reason they find themselves in a corner where they can hardly move.
All right, well, I want to take a second, because meanwhile at the United Nations General Assembly, Turkish President Erdogan actually angered Israel's ambassador Gilad Erdan to the point that Erdan walked out of the General Assembly during the pre-recorded address by Erdogan. In the video, Erdogan attacks Israel by calling the occupation in Judea and Samaria the bleeding wound of humanity. He praises the Palestinians for standing up to Israel's oppression, violence, and intimidation, saying that, quote, the dirty hand that reaches the privacy of Jerusalem is constantly increasing its audacity. Where is this coming from? Why inject himself into the conflict in such a way constantly? Erdogan seems to always be there.
I'm surprised because we know Erdogan's attitude. We knew ahead what he's going to say. And if you are not happy about it, why enter? Why make this move of leaving in the middle just for a headline?
Well, but also, again, with Erdogan, if he's so anti-Israel, because I feel like a lot of people have this question, if Erdogan is so anti-Israel, why does he insist on maintaining ties with Jerusalem?
That's a good question, because Erdogan and Turkey today is a hostile country to Israel and vice versa. Israel is a hostile country to Turkey. It's definitely not normal relations. And the fact that we keep embassies is almost fictitious. And I'm glad that it's still there, because this will maybe one day enable a recovery. But it's really, really not the situation. We are hostile to each other to the point that I think it's irreparable at the moment. Wow. Big things will have to change in the region in order to repair the bilateral damage to the Israeli-Turkish relations. But to come back to the issue of living in the middle, we made enough mistakes, technical mistakes on our diplomacy, like sitting the Turkish ambassador on a low sofa and so on. These are unnecessary gestures. Sure. The conflict is there. Israel is working against Turkish interest in the region. Turkey is working against Israeli interest in the region. We know the situation, and all these games are just to make headlines. Headlines and unnecessary headlines.
All right, Ambassador Liel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Moving on, it's the 6th day of lockdowns, part 2 in Israel, and things are getting worse before they get better. The health ministry recording yet another record number of new coronavirus infections overnight, while the government coronavirus cabinet discusses additional restrictions. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
A surge in testing over the holidays resulting in a surge of new infections, with an alarming contagion rate of 11.6%. Israel's total number of coronavirus cases now exceeding the 200,000 mark, with the health ministry reporting nearly 7,000 new infections in the past 24 hours. And this bringing the number of active cases up to over 54,300, 634 people in serious condition, the death toll rising by 31 to 1,316. Still, the coronavirus cabinet concluded its 9-hour session on Tuesday with no new decisions, and instead scheduled to reconvene Wednesday morning. Israeli leaders are looking to do something, though. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu criticizing the weekly demonstrations against him for being a health hazard, saying, "You can only go to the Western Wall if you live within 1,000 meters. Yet you can come from all over the country to protest on Balfour Street." And now, coronavirus czar Professor Roni Gamzu seems to agree, indicating that he would support a decision to ban protests for the time being, as well as banning synagogue attendance over the Yom Kippur holidays. Interior Minister and religious Shas Party head Aryeh Deri, on the other hand, is pushing back, saying he'd only accept synagogue closures if the protests were ended too.
And now reportedly, the coronavirus cabinet has concluded with Prime Minister Netanyahu and many politicians from across the political spectrum calling for complete closures and tightened restrictions, including the closing down of Ben Gurion Airport, the temporary banning of mass protests in Jerusalem and elsewhere, and the shutting down of synagogues throughout the coming Yom Kippur holiday. And now, speaking of the lockdowns, missing out on our favorite bars and cafes or even just going to the beach may be hard, but perhaps the biggest blow to our spirits comes from missing out on life events, bar and bat mitzvahs, weddings, funerals. Joining us to discuss is Israeli psychologist Dr. Camila Fokash-Lavan. Camila, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, now I want to start with a tough topic, with mourning and sadness and guilt, because, we've heard a lot of stories of people who are not able to maybe make it to funerals or even to hospitals to care for their loved ones, regardless of what they're suffering from, if it's coronavirus or something else. How do we deal with that?
So it's a very important question, because we all, as humans, we go through stages how we process things, yes? So this becomes even more important when there is a sense of loss or there's an illness or some kind of a traumatic event, yes? So not being able to feel empowered in a sense, yes, to go care for your loved one and just sit there by the side and not do anything can be very debilitating and really, really difficult, especially if at some point they will, chas v'cholila, yes, pass away. And then this guilt is just really highlighted, and the trauma is highlighted as well.
All right, and what about, maybe in positive events as well, like becoming a new parent or having a birthday or an anniversary or a wedding, or studying for your bar and bat mitzvah, you're expecting all these people to come, and then COVID, how do we maybe shift our mindset away from this, the stereotypical massive event?
Mm-hmm. So in the beginning, I think it was more seen and sensed because we were all just grasping at straws and not knowing what our name is, basically, right? So what to do with the events, what not to do, to get married, not to get married. But slowly we saw which is a beautiful thing really to see. Slowly we saw how adaptive we are, and yoga on Zoom, like all kinds of things like that, including weddings that people did literally in their house, dressed up to the ninth and being incredibly shiny and happy and smiley. Yes, so we see the progression on how we are very adaptable, and we do learn to be within the new environment. I think that at this point, it's starting to be easier for people to cope.
Well, but what about, maybe the people on the guest list? How do we show support for these events and for the people we love in a meaningful way beyond, like just send the check and say, okay, hey, I was thinking of you.
Right. So it's very important, again, to understand that even though you're invited to a Zoom wedding, right, and not everyone can come, so sometimes people get offended, like, okay, why am I not one of those 40 people that, arrived? It's possible that there's no way. There's just sometimes no way. And it makes it very difficult also for the groom and for the kala to even have an event because of this. And I have some clients actually that recently got married, and it was very difficult for them. How not to offend?
So what can we do? Right. How can we go about, meaningfully contributing to these?
So it's very important to be able to, first of all, if you're the ones that are having the event, yes, do take the time, literally make a list. Think business, okay? I know we usually don't think that way. Yeah, we don't usually treat our life that way, but we should in some aspects, especially because it will be way more organized. It will be not as overwhelming. You'll know what you're doing, and then you also won't miss anybody. So literally put your list of guests together as, you already probably will have it, and then make a point to call for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, talk to them, and they'll be a part of this whole experience with you.
Vice versa for the guests. Make a point to call and make yourself heard. And kind of get into it.
Communicate.
All right. Camila, there's so much to do, so little time to analyze it all. Thank you so much for coming in again.
Thank you.
All right. In other news, a major win for Jewish civil rights advocates and attorneys after protests were held outside Zoom's headquarters in San Jose on Tuesday. The popular video conference platform is now forbidding San Francisco State University from featuring Palestinian convicted terrorist Leila Khaled in a coming webinar. Zoom is explaining the decision in a statement, saying that in light of the speaker's reported affiliation or membership in a U.S.-designated foreign terrorist organization and SFSU's inability to confirm otherwise, we determined the meeting is in violation of Zoom's terms of service and told SFSU that they may not use Zoom for this particular event. The statement was addressed to the Lawfare Project, which is at the forefront of the #EndJewHatred movement. And this success comes after several failed attempts by activists and lawyers to get the university itself to remove Khaled as a guest speaker. In August 1969, Khaled was part of the PFLP terror group mission to hijack TWA Flight 840 from Rome to Tel Aviv. The group redirected the flight to Damascus and later blew up a section of the plane, though no injuries were reported. PFLP leadership allegedly believed that the then Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Yitzhak Rabin, would be on board. He wasn't. Moving on, there is no better catalyst for innovation than dire necessity, and this latest technology certainly solves a new but major problem. In light of the coronavirus, Israeli-based Touchless AI is now deploying a voice-activated solution that can transform any digital kiosk into a touch-free device. This means that restaurants, airports, medical centers, theme parks, and really any other points of sale can now utilize this hands-free technology and add an additional layer of protection between their clients. The system is already being piloted in the United States and Europe. And so how does it work? Well, Touchless AI shows numbers on a screen that correlate to menu options, and people need only say the number of their selection to make it. Also, the technology is currently already available in English, Japanese, and Hebrew, and it can be modified quickly for all languages. It's also already supported by all web-based platforms and operating systems. And now for some more delicious news, Israeli wineries have a lot to be proud about. Nearly 70 Israeli wines winning top marks in this year's international decanter competition. Nittany Manson with the story.
A prestigious annual competition. 116 judges tasting at least 16,518 wines throughout the 2020 decanter wine competition. Each wine then getting a score and a grade from commended to bronze, silver, gold, platinum, and finally best in show. While showing up big time for the Jewish state, 69 Israeli wines received top marks at the month-long judging, with 6 wineries winning gold, up from 3 in 2019. And of the 6 wineries, 4 of them are based in Judea and Samaria. But the winning wines include 2 wines from the Shiloh region and 1 wine each from the Gvaot, Tulip, and Yarden wineries, each winning a score of 95. Meanwhile, the Psagot winery in the Judean hills near Jerusalem came in on top amongst the Israeli winners with a score of 96, earned for its 2016 peak red wine. As for the Best in Show, well, France secured the most top prizes with 12 of the competition's top 50 awards. But not to worry, 6 gold medals one year, Best in Show the next, and congratulations again to all the winners.
Now, the annual 24-hour fast of Yom Kippur, or the Hebrew Day of Atonement, is just days away. And common tactics to surviving the day-long starvation includes stuffing oneself on the eve of the holiday and staying up late so as to sleep half of the fast day away. But there are more effective strategies to help you get through. And here to walk us through a couple of them is Mallory Hope Schwartz, fitness instructor, nutritional planner, and wellness advocate. Mallory, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. All right, now first off, how can our viewers prepare ahead of time for an easy and safe fast?
All right. Well, I know we Israelis love our coffee, but it is one of the hardest things to break before you start fasting. So my suggestion is to give yourself maybe a day or two away from caffeine. Try to ease off, maybe only one a day before you start the fast. This will help you ease into the fast and make sure you don't have any highs or lows, especially those hunger headaches.
All right, well, I'm already scared if you're telling me I can't have coffee. All right, but the first instinct, now if we're talking about the moment the fast ends, the first instinct, after that is to immediately grab every edible item in sight, but of course that's not very healthy for us either. What is the best method to breaking the fast and some easy foods to break it with?
Yes, we want to stick with really light, lean protein. So again, you're going to have eggs, fish. Okay. Of course, we want to grab the bagel, the challah. But just try to be light on it because it is going to make your stomach feel extra special that night and especially the next day.
What about mac and cheese? Because that's like a family favorite in the Porus house.
Oh, that's a big moment. My family favorite was always kugel, because we're very American here, and a homemade carrot cake with homemade cream cheese frosting. Ooh, so don't worry, I do it up too. But try to ease into it, maybe only one plateful.
Okay. All right, now what about the recovery time? Because this is something that I don't think most people ever really think about. I've never thought about it. The day after breaking the fast, what are some key tips to refreshing ourselves?
Yes. So I think people forget that the next day is also going to feel just as weird. Set an alarm, wake up, drink water, and take a walk. Allow your body to naturally digest, get some movement going. I know we're going to feel a little lazy and lethargic the next day, but if you start to get back on routine, your digestion and your stomach will also thank you the next day.
All right, well, obviously, many of us are going to be spending the holidays, of course, at home this year, especially if you're in Israel during the lockdowns. And you mentioned that you have some holiday mantras for our viewers to help them get through this period of time, including at-home light movement exercises, something like that?
You kind of want to be kind to your body and your mind this holiday season. We are getting too cooped up at home. So if you allow some space to move at your house, maybe set a timer to stand up, get away from any technology, even just get away from the couch, get away from other screens, and adding some movement to your day before, during, and after, you're going to feel so much better.
All right. Well, for more wellness plans and tips, check out Mallory's website and Instagram at Mallory Hopes and MalloryHopes.com, of course. Mallory Hope Schwartz, thank you so much for being with us.
Bye. Thank y'all.
And now let's take a look at the weather forecast. Not a whole lot of change to report. Lows tonight expected to be around 72 Fahrenheit or 22 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow should be clear and warm with an average high of 87 Fahrenheit or 31 degrees Celsius. And before we go, of course, let's take a look at what's going viral in Israel. What is happening? Oh, so good. This video makes me so happy. All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.45 shekels to the American dollar and 2.59 to the Canadian dollar. For more news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube and Roku TV pages. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you so much for watching.